Yes, it's Saturday. What other day could it be with this music? And it's 11 o'clock, and we would like to welcome our Badminton Talk Podcast listeners all over the world to this next podcast. Mark Topping, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. How are you?
I am super, John. I'm up in Bushmills. I'm only about a mile away from the famous Bushmills whiskey distillery, John.
You're up.
This COVID, I'm starting to travel a bit more. The normality is slowly returning, John.
So, Mark, how many whiskies have you had so far? Tell our listeners.
I think everybody knows I'm teetotal. I don't drink at all.
Oh, Mark is a teetotal. I think I spotted you with the odd half beer after you did very well in the Badminton Premier League a few seasons ago, Mark.
Oh, occasionally, yes. Apparently, if you go on the Bushmills Distillery Whiskey Tour, you get a free whiskey at the end. I didn't know that. I haven't been on it myself. Wow,
a free whiskey. Well, that's not bad, Mark. There's not many things in life that are free today. So if you can get a free whiskey, that is well worth going for. Of course, today we want to bring you back to our sailor.
Take me away.
Oh yes, the Alban Eastern Wind and Krista Berg, released in 1980. One of the great classics, of course. And of course, we're not here to listen to Krista Berg. No, sadly not. We're here to obviously introduce you to David McHugh and our second guest, of course, which we will tee up once we kind of complete the David McHugh interview, which we will go back to very, very shortly. Mark, tell me, what did you make of the first part of the interview with David McHugh? You know, the first question he said is, it's important to know, what does success look like? That's a great way of writing a strategy, asking yourself, before we write the strategy, tell us, what does success look like? Because if you can't define that, you're really not going to write the right strategy. What do you think, Mark?
Absolutely, John. Really good questions. What do you want from the sport of badminton? What does it look like? Is it a huge number of players playing right throughout the grassroots, all getting great exercise? What a sport for exercise badminton is. So maybe that would be one good strategy to have. And then we talked an awful lot about elite high performance, because David comes from that end of the sporting world. He works in that world. And what does success look like at that level? What do you think, John? Yeah,
no, I think you have to really, if you're, any CEO of any organization and you have your board of directors, you can't write your strategy till you have a vision of what success looks like. And I love the word that David used in the interview. You need a pathway, and I think Richard Vaughan talked about pathways, but you need a pathway for your elite players. You need a pathway for your journey players, which are really the big bulk of the players. You need a pathway for your Special Olympic players. You need a pathway for your Masters players. You need pathways, Mark. That's what. Even you need academic pathways for your elite players, Mark.
Absolutely, John. Yeah, and it's sketching out those pathways. What do they look like? How do you progress from a junior badminton club into an adult badminton club? Do we welcome in our 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are still mad keen about badminton? And how do we encourage them to stay in badminton? There's so many brilliant questions, aren't there, John?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So many. And he alluded to that one family has dominated badminton in the last 10 years. And of course, you have to give that family credit. The McGees, what a wonderful ambassadorial set of individuals to promote badminton for so long and continue to do it. Mark, what do you think?
Oh, absolutely, John. Yeah, the McGees from Ruffo, first of all, they've just got such a fantastic passion for the game.
Yes.
And that comes across. So that's I think their starting point, and they're so keen to learn and to push on and try to get better and improve. It's fabulous to see, John.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We're going to give a big shout out on our to the McGee's. Absolutely, continued success from the Badminton Talk Podcast, of course, brought to you by the Q Shuttle. Absolutely. Okay, so Mark, the way we're going to work, we're going to finish off. We're going to jump into the last few minutes of just finishing off where we were with David, and we will then continue on with more David. When we finish with that, we'll move on to our next guest on the theme of sponsorship. So, Mark, are you ready? Are you ready to go?
Absolutely, John. Looking forward to it as ever.
Okay, so let us go back to when where we finished last week with David McHugh. Of course, an interview we did earlier on in the year. Anybody who missed David McHugh's podcast, of course, you can now listen to it. But he's the former Irish and European Championship, and he sailed against the best in the world, including 4 times America's Cup winner Russell Coutts and New Zealand skipper Dan Baker. And he's represented Ireland at 2 World Championships and the 1995 Pre-Olympics in Atlanta. He then retired and set up a company called Lineup Sports. And if anybody wants to check you out on that, have a look at Lineup Sports. He's founder, executive director, and represents serious athletes. And I'm saying serious athletes. Now, here we go, jumping back into where Mark and myself finished off last week.
And continue this, but I was just going to just jump in there. Sorry, Mark, I know you want to ask a question. Maybe after the pause you can come in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was going to say we did recently speak to Sam McGee, who is, as we know, you mentioned the McGee households and an amazing brand family. And Sam, when we discussed the subject of money and how you make money, because Sam has been at the top level. They've been up there in roughly the top 30 in the world. That's where he's got. But and Mark made the point, you need to be in top 20, top 10 to really make the killer. But he said it's making money is a little bit about everything. You're not going to just make a lot on any one thing. A sponsor will give you X. You'll play in the German league. You'll get Y. You'll get maybe some minor sponsors. You'll get a Z. You'll do some coaching. You'll do some restringing. But for the 99% of players in this sport, and maybe a lot of minority sports, it is about using the sport to leverage your own career afterwards, whatever that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole separate topic for after our pause here, but a balanced dual career approach is absolutely essential for any elite athlete. There are very few athletes in any sport in this country alone, maybe taking a few exceptions like Brian O'Driscoll, and literally they are a few, they're anomalies. Every athlete is going to need to transition out of elite sport and into a career. So that model of balanced education, skills development, transferable skills is absolutely crucial, because no matter how good you are at elite sport, it has a very finite life cycle, and it may exist between the ages of 16 and 28.
Yeah.
You're then going to have to work for roughly 25 to 30 years. So if you're putting 10 years into high-performance sport and you have to develop a career for 30 years after that, the weighting should be completely reversed. But to be a high performer, you have to be incredibly dedicated and focused. So, again, I think the principle of what the Institute do, and in particular Owen Reinish, in terms of supporting the athletes in that dual career and transition process, is absolutely essential. So you can string rackets, you can coach, and you can play, and you can get appearance fees and a little bit of sponsorship when you're an elite athlete. But when you're not an elite athlete, you have a choice. Either you stay in the sport and you coach, or you go into the administrative side. Or hopefully you have managed to build a academic career parallel, which will give you opportunities outside. And, there are very, very few athletes on the planet that don't have to worry about money. And then, even the top performers in rugby, the best paid, it's a 10-year career.
Yes.
You have to find a job, you have to find a purpose, and you have to have developed transferable skills and a profile outside of your sport and an identity. And I think that the work in particular that Owen does in that space is absolutely essential. But I would strongly argue that it's completely under-resourced in proportion to performance. I think the GPA and the RPI, I mean, there's a general willingness and necessity now to support the person, not just the athlete.
Yeah, David, fantastic. Just, okay, our next question is...
And,
right.
And at this stage...
thanks, David. That was...
at this stage, we are interrupting our podcast, Mark, because I'm going to tee up the continued part. Caught you there. To keep all our listeners here on the Badminton Talk Podcast, of course, sponsored by the Q Shuttle. Just as I'm digging into the archives to dig up the second part, what do you think of that so far, Mark? Transferable skills. You need transferable skills because you've got to work 25 or 30 years when you hang up those rackets, Mark.
It is, yeah, and it's not an easy transition to go from being a high-level elite sports player, and you're going to have to bring that mindset and adapt and try to move into another area. It's not easy. You've got left behind. You're maybe in your mid-30s. There are people in other careers have spent 10, 15 years developing their career, and you're starting late, but you've got to start somewhere. And the long journey, always the journey of 1,000 steps, starts with taking that first step, John.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. You're so right. And thank you for, Mark, giving us a great insight and talking there for 1 minute. I knew I could rely upon you because I managed to tee up the next bit of the podcast interview with David. So shall we continue on, Mark? What do you think, or should we keep chatting here?
No, let's get to our guest. I love listening to the guests.
Yeah, okay. Our listeners are in for a real treat for the remainder of this interview. I think we're going to run with this. It's going to go for another 21, 22 minutes. So back to myself, then Mark introducing you back to David.
Fascinating stuff. Mark, you have a question for David?
Yeah, just to sort of follow up on what David was talking about, if kids are fun, 6, 7, 8 years old, I couldn't agree more with David's last point. Probably education for the sort of 18 to 30-year-olds. You've got to look after your career afterwards. Actually, there was one guy you mentioned. I didn't quite pick up his name, Owen, and who does he work for? And maybe just give another shout out to
that.
I
mean, like the Institute of Sport is the deliverer of high performance service in sport in Ireland, and one of the divisions within there that it's maybe slightly away from performance, but very intrinsically linked, is athlete life skills. So Owen Reinish, who is himself a 3-time Olympian and finished 4th in Beijing in canoeing, heads up that service. And he now has a team, I think, of 2 or 3 alongside him. But there is definitely a mood shift since probably 2012, Dara Sheridan, in that, you have to treat the athletes like people. And you have to equip them during their high-performance career with as much of the ammunition to transition into life beyond high-performance sport, because, as we said, it's a very, very short life cycle in the bigger picture of things. And it is very hard to get an athlete to say, oh, yeah, look, I'll balance education or work or otherwise with high performance, because they are so single-minded and focused. Mm-hmm. But it is absolutely necessary. And I think the modern world of, blended and online learning, athletes are running out of excuses.
That's very true.
I can appreciate fully why an athlete can't go to college full time and also be an athlete, but there are ways of learning. And a lot of our rugby players will study at night. They will study at a level that's suitable to them, be it project management, ACCA, psychology. And then there are outliers, like Paul O'Donovan, who's a qualified physio studying medicine and an Olympic medalist.
Brilliant.
He's an outlier. But there is really no excuse for an athlete not to invest in themselves, be it their brand, their education, their transition, and put some emphasis on life beyond sport, because when it ends, it ends. There is no going back. And 99.9% of the population of elite athletes have to generate revenue beyond the sport itself. So taking out golfers, tennis players, footballers, the 3 big global sports, 99% of people have jobs now,
Yeah.
And certainly their sports CV and their profile helps them in that manner. I always thought one of the best parts about the Rio Olympics and badminton and Scott Evans was there was so much more to him than just a badminton player. He was a character. He was outspoken. He did a lot of good for the sport, but he also did an awful lot of good for himself in that, he was an excellent communicator. He was very human about everything, yet he was a brilliant performer.
Yeah, and I think David, it was a testament when he did decide after the Rio Olympics to retire relatively early, because he was only 31, and you had the likes of players like Lee Chong Wei and Lin Dan, and going right into their mid 30s and there. But he took the opportunity to go into business with Peter Gator initially, with the Gator Academy. It wasn't forever, because it moved him then to move into a different aspect of business. But Gator could see the potential also in Scott, as you said, through his unique charisma, if you want to call it. I call it in digital marketing terms your purple cow, your unique selling point, what your shout out is, what makes you different than the masses. And he had a purple cow that was fantastic. I say, I totally endorse what you're saying there. That's,
I look at my first client and one of my closest friends in sport is Rob Carney, and he's 14 years of high performance with Leinster and Ireland and won every trophy imaginable. He's starting on Saturday for Western Force against Brumbies in Super 15. Now, he knows there's an end point to it, and that end point is very set in stone of one season. But he spent an awful lot of time around his sport, doing his primary degree, doing his master's, setting up businesses, investing in businesses. So his transition will be easier than somebody who has potentially ignored it and is left with a void, both, physically, but mentally, psychologically, is that, this is who I've always been. Who am I now? What's my identity? And, we talk a lot about second curve careers and reestablishing your identity when you don't have a racket in your hand.
Yes.
Will people recognize you? Will they understand what value you can add to them, beyond being on a court? And that's so crucial. Both for well-being, but also the practical reality of everybody, needs to work. Yeah. So, transitioning in the sport into the business side of the sport like badminton is certainly an avenue. But unless it becomes something that you're very good at, you are more than likely to transition to an industry outside of your sport. So how do you equip yourself best for that?
Mm.
Yes, definitely. Scott is a really good example. He's been incredibly... I think he's been proactive, I think is the word I would use with Scott Evans, and he's now made himself into one of the best coaches in Denmark. And in Denmark, they pay good money for good coaches, and he spotted the opportunity and he's grabbed it. And it's
but I'd say Dan McGee has invested heavily in his coaching career. He's been through the PEP program in the Institute. He's been mentored. He's been developed. They've helped him create a career in coaching. And, I think his current position of high performance director or head coach, I'm not sure the right terminology, but it's given him a career on the court, but not playing. And not everybody can become a coach either. So like as I said, it's about having that balanced approach to life. Appreciating the singular mindedness of achieving success is, unrelenting. But if you ignore the rest of your life, then, the chances are it's going to be very difficult when you do transition out of sport.
Yeah. So if you were giving a talk to any of those sporting federations like Badminton Ireland, say ones that would be crying out at times for guidance, you said there, David, there's no excuse for an athlete not to learn with blended learning technology that is now available. But to look at it the other way, almost these federations, and it's again, I'm not knocking them, I'm just trying to be taking the points you're saying. There's an onus on them to make sure all the athletes are not missing out on any education. In fact, they have a pathway with their education as much as the pathway with
There's an onus on the system that you're not just a commodity there on a 4-year cycle to please the nation. There has to be that duty of care outside of sport that, we'll invest in you to perform, but we'll also support you to transition. And I think that's a crucial part for every sport, be it high performance or professional. And I think there has to be an emphasis on that too. Your duty of care is to ensure that an athlete is supported in that transitional process and that you do what you can. It's almost like, again, it's my opinion only, but, if you're an elite level athlete in Ireland, you're funded by the government. When you stop being an elite level athlete, there needs to be a moratorium period of some level of financial support, as long as it's directed in a way to help you transition.
Yes, yeah.
Again, it's an opinion rather than fact, or the fact that anything is going to change. And often you see athletes who, the way the funding cycle works here, if you're on the top tier of funding in 2021 and you retire, you're actually still funded in 2022. Right. But then you have to say, well, I'm going to participate in X and Y, but you're out of the system.
Yeah.
Whereas, in my opinion, that funding should be reduced, but directed strategically towards upskilling an individual in their transition. But again, opinion.
Yeah, well, if you look at a lot of people, as you say, David, who work in jobs that for 30 or 40 years, certainly I remember my father worked in Guinness's when they get to the retirement age of whatever, late 50s or early 60s, they go on a course about pension life and what it's like to transit, what the next phase, you call it transition, what is the next transition from your current situation to your next situation? And they need that nurturing. They need to know what to do in their 60s because it's a different way of life. No longer you're in the system of working. And there's a lot of parallels there. And there's
a lot of facets to it. There's the practical support, but there's also the psychological support.
Yeah,
psychological.
That's huge. Yeah,
like it is very. Every athlete will tell you that there is a real, emotional dip post elite sport, and I saw actually Badminton Ireland tweeting something during the week. Do you have a growth mindset, or I can't remember what the terminology was, but
that's right. Growth mindset. Yeah, I think you're right.
Growth mindset, is your ability to learn and develop and move forward. Often athletes find that difficult when they step away from elite sport because, they've been so cocooned, they've been so managed, they've been so structured. And it's no different in rugby where you're told what to wear, when you eat, when you're travelling to, well, hang on a second, I've got to manage my own time. Now, how do I fill my time? What value can I add? How can I generate revenue? What happens on a Monday morning when I wake up and I don't have a job? What's my week look like?
Scary thought.
It is quite scary. And again, using Rob as a good example, the first thing we did when he finished with Leinster after the EPRC quarter-final against Sarries in September, he had a lag period between September and January when he started in Australia. First thing we did was set up an online calendar.
Yes.
Now, obviously, he had his commercial commitments and he had media commitments and he had his own personal development stuff going on, but I should put it in the calendar and say, look, this is what your week looks like. Here's where your gaps are. What are you going to do with your time? You can't just go from coffee shop to coffee shop and hope the lads are in for, a chat or, sit at home and watch Netflix. So, he's a good example in that he was very cognizant of that. But there are plenty that aren't, and have that total dip of, the highs of being in an Olympic Games or the highs of winning medals to, well, hang on, I'm out of that now. Who am I?
Yeah.
What am I good at? What am I going to do for the next 25 years? Yeah. And that's a process that needs coaching and, in the same way it does on the court.
Yeah, I think, David, your company, Mark, Lineup Sports could certainly facilitate a lot of players on that transition. Listening to you this morning, David.
I have experience in that. I did my nearly 4 years in the Institute supporting the wider group. But the wider group is 200 plus athletes. It's very difficult to give bespoke mentoring and counselling to that number of people. And then there's also a whole cultural shift from the athlete side of saying, well, actually, I recognise the value of this support and I need to tap into it.
Yes.
And some individuals are better at that and some sports are better at that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, Mark.
Coming off.
Yeah, no, I need sleep.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a good thing to cut Mark off, and he cuts me off too, David, so it's okay.
Sorry, carry on.
Okay. Sorry, Mark. This is Zoom because we have to...
I know we've only got probably 3 or 4 minutes. David's got appointments, and we've probably only got 3 or 4 minutes of his time, so I thought I might just ask a different question, move on to a different topic. I suppose the question is, and there's no right or wrong answer to this in my opinion, but would you advise a really talented player in this country to go abroad and develop their career abroad, or would you think that maybe it might be better to stay at home? Like in badminton, Scott Evans moved away and has been very successful in Denmark. But actually, Badminton Ireland have been very good. We've actually got dual approaches in badminton, I think, in that Dan McGee as the high performance director at Badminton Ireland has got 12 to 16 really good players working from home, if you like, at the setup in National Indoor Arena. What's your take on that debate, if you like?
Look, I don't think there's a right and a wrong. I mean, if you're an elite performer, you want to be in the best possible system. So where's the best possible system? So if it can be provided domestically, I would say, it's always nicer to be around friends and family and sleep in your own bed and, be comfortable in your environment. If there's a better facility overseas and a better way to get you to success, well, then I understand that model completely too. So, the question really lies in the fact that, can we provide the best facilities here that players don't need to travel abroad or live abroad or be in other systems?
I think the one thing, Dave, just to throw in one thing. Sorry, I know and I'm really sorry for being.
I'm okay for a few minutes. Yeah. I can delay.
Okay, because I think I know what Mark is asking here. I'm going to kind of be a little more direct as well, Mark. You don't mind me asking it? Okay, one of the guys we'll be interviewing on these podcasts. In fact, fairly soon is a guy called Ray Stevens, and he is just, as Mark would say, was an amazing badminton player, coach and all. And I've been doing a little research on him, but what he said was, if you want to be the best athlete, if you want to be the best, you need to be going into whatever your situation is. In this case, it's a badminton hall. You need to be aspiring with 4 and 5 badminton players of that highest elite standard. That's not the case in Ireland, and I'm not saying that in any way. There's some fantastic athletes. We might have one great one. We might have 2 great ones, okay, if you want to say it. We don't have what's needed. So if I take the Ray Stevens approach and say that to you, it's just not here. If you want to be a top 20 player, it's not going to happen. And I think, the Ray Stevens camp, to me, says that's correct. I'm not sure if the model can do it here. Not today, maybe in 5 or 10 years' time, if there's more players, that's possible. And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we're back to the chicken and egg question, and looking at boxing as a good example. The best nations in the world want to come to Ireland to spar Irish boxers because they believe that, that's the best competition they can get. Now, that said, it takes time to develop that model.
Yeah.
So, I certainly know from my own experience, and our training partners for the Sydney Olympics were Australians, Tom King and Mark Turnbull. We weren't a threat to them. They needed essentially people to train with. We didn't go to the games; they won a gold medal. So there's different kind of approaches to it. I would always say if you want to be the best, you've got to play and train with the best. Yeah. So where is the best? So if I am an aspiring badminton player and I have the ability and the resource to get to the top level, then unquestionably I want to be playing with those players that are ranked higher than me, that are better than me, and that will help me develop as a player. And I will either come up to their level, I'll either surpass it, or I won't make it. Yeah. But often I think, if you phrase it like you did, if you stay in the Irish model and the best is at, 60 in the world, how can you get better? Yeah. Through competition, yes, but competition is a pressurized environment. So how do you learn? There are arguments to and fro. Obviously, the long-term solution is to develop a very competitive domestic environment where you are training with the best. Yeah, I think you can't do that. Yeah, I totally. I think it's where the federation might encourage a player. Say, just take Nat, and I don't want to personalise anyone, but people in Ireland would know him. You'd say, right, Nat, we need to send you over to Denmark or France or somewhere for 3 months training blocks here. You need to go over. You need to play with those best players in the world. We need to support you there. You come back to Ireland. You do another month here. Then you go somewhere else. Perhaps there's that. Maybe we use the word blended balance, but that gets him that gets him exposed to the next level to bring his game up. Because I always remember, if I wanted to improve my game playing at journeyman or woman level, I had to play with players better than me. Otherwise, I was never going to get better. Listen, even in my own recreational sport, mountain biking, there's no point me going mountain biking with beginners. I was going mountain biking with Greg Callahan, who's the best enduro rider Ireland has ever produced. I'm nowhere near him, but I learn from following him and, being in that environment. I don't learn from my mate who just took it up 3 months ago, and it's a mindset.
Yeah, it's a mindset.
You look at Leinster as a rugby team, and you look at all these young players coming through. I mean, there's 2 or 3 names starting against Gwent Dragons tomorrow night. Almost unheard of. The reason they're playing is because they're in that high performance environment that the best that Ireland can offer, and they're developing and taking their opportunities. So chicken and egg. You want to build it here, you want to have it here, but that takes time. So if you want to develop individuals at a higher level, arguably there is a lot of sense in saying, well, you need to be in a higher performing environment.
Yeah, brilliant advice there, David. Mark, any final comment? But that's been, I'll just say, look, David, former Irish and European championship who sailed, as he said, against the best in the world, and now runs his company called Line Up Sports with the top athletes across many sports. Hopefully one day we will, David, get a badminton player on your portfolio. What do you think, Mark?
I'd love to see it. It would be just brilliant.
Yeah.
But we've got to work hard for it. I suppose it comes down to results, and it comes down to whether a sponsor thinks they can get value for money out of that. I suspect I'm not an expert in it, but that's probably.
No, I think what a lot of people forget about sponsorship, just to finish on this, is it isn't the money you give the athlete; it's the money you spend around that, telling people why they gave the money to the athlete, money to the athlete. So, if a young badminton player picks up 20 grand. The only beneficiary in that is the young athlete who's getting the 20 grand. If the company who gave it to him put 100 grand behind it, telling the world why they're doing it, well then, that's how sponsorship works. And coming back to Nat, his visibility in the FBD above the line communications now, and his use of image and their activation of him, for me, is doing a huge amount of good for badminton.
Yes.
And for him.
Brilliant.
But it's the spend they're putting behind it. It's not what they're giving Nat into his bank account on a yearly basis. It's how they're activating, how they're leveraging, how they're making him more visible, how they're using him to communicate their brand messages to the wider public. And they're giving him the platform and the forum. They're not just giving him a check.
Yeah, and David, that's like, I worked long time ago for Coca-Cola for 7 years, and the Coca-Cola model was very simple. Every euro you spend on sponsorship, you have to spend one more euro in promotion. And that's what you've just said.
That's probably a little dated now, but the principle is exactly right. There's no point spending money if you don't tell people you're doing it.
Yeah.
So, I often get, would you sponsor me? And I sponsor a few young athletes in various sports because I love the sports, back to our conversation earlier.
Yes.
But I really do it on the basis that it's philanthropy and gratuitous donations rather than, I'm going to get something out of this.
Yes, yeah, no, absolutely. Well, listen, I think we're going to wrap up literally this hour. We can call this hour with David McHugh. David, thank you so much for coming on to the Badminton Talk podcast. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Pleasure.
And thank you for volunteering your time today. And anybody that has not heard of David McHugh, I hope they have. David McHugh, as I said, has his Line Up Sports company, and check him out if you're looking for any advice. Thank you very much, David.
Yes, I just echo John. Just really, it's very articulate, very intelligent contributions. I love listening and learning, and I learned a lot today. So thank you.
Yeah, well, it's been my pleasure, so thanks for having me on.
Okay, and
oh my God, Mark, what a phenomenal interview. I don't really know where to go from all that information. What did you make of, David talking about unrelenting success, no excuse for learning anyone? The system has to have a duty of care to players, this growth mindset. What did you make of all that, Mark?
Yeah, I love that. And I do think that is so important. It's probably something that probably a lot of national governing bodies in all different sports have not paid huge attention to, is a duty of care to their ex-athletes, to the retiring athletes. What they should be making plans, discussing, thinking, and yes, the money has to start coming down, but spend the money in education, upskilling. I love those points. I hadn't really thought about them before until David mentioned them today on the podcast. Fantastic, John.
Yeah, of course. We want to thank the Hughes Shuttle for sponsoring this amazing podcast. I mean, they say, Mark, information is a great thing. And of course, I have and you have all that information from the brilliant podcast interview we did with your brother, Bruce Topping. And there's kind of something I've taken out of that. Obviously, we'll hear about Bruce during the summer on the Badminton Talk podcast, which is absolutely, oh my God. I mean, all these podcasts are so brilliant. And so is this. But I recall one point where he said, after giving his so much time to badminton, Mark, all of a sudden he woke up on a Monday morning and it was gone. And there was no preparation for that. I know there was no academy like the way it is, but I'm purely talking about he played, he gave so much, and like the way Sam McGee's given so much, the Adcocks give so much, and if you wake up on Monday morning and there isn't the federation or your branch or someone looking after you, it has to be a huge shock, Mark. How to make that adjustment, Mark?
Yeah, John, it is. It's very mentally tough. It's your whole life. You've been training. You've been thinking of nothing else about improving your game of badminton, pushing on. How do I get better? And then when you retire, and the Adcocks are probably going to experience this in the next couple of months, it's tough. I can't go, and I don't need to go to the badminton court anymore. I don't need to worry about trying to beat such and such opponent in the top 5 in the world. I don't need to worry about trying to get a medal. Maybe it's a time to adapt. I've long believed in myself. This is my own personal theory. I've long believed in the sort of positive idea of being fine and being committed to a goal of always moving forward.
Yes.
And if I'm backing up, it's just to get a running start. So maybe this is for the Adcocks who've just retired, this is a sort of a backing up moment. You've got to have a bit of downtime and plan and think, and I'm just getting ready to run into my next assignment or my next project.
Yes, and I think, you often hear of footballers, because we know football is a very popular sport, one of the most attractive ones. Like footballers' careers, as we know, earns quite, for many, finishes up in their early 30s if they're lucky enough. And many of them suffer depression and downsides to, the sport afterwards, because, as you say, that regiment, so structured program is not there for them anymore. And, they haven't been coached or trained, or there hasn't been the pathway facilitated for this transformation. So you can understand how some can just simply kind of almost go to a melting point for a little while before they kind of figure it out, Mark.
Absolutely. And I think it's natural as well. It's going to take you a while to change, think, have different goals in life. And it's not easy to transition. And it's mentally tough. It's a real tough time of your life. But look, fundamentally, I think we're all incredibly resilient human beings, and we can adapt. Everybody can adapt, and we can change. And I know it seems tough at certain moments in life, but we can do it, and we can push on. And we've got to stay positive.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like back to my days in school, old Darwin's theory, where he said it wasn't the most intelligent or the smartest or whatever it was that was going to survive, but it was about those that were most adaptable to change. And those that are most adaptable to change do come through very strong in the end, because I suppose the one constant in the world we're in, Mark, is change. We've seen it with COVID for the last year, maybe now 14 months, we've all had to change. We've had to record our, let's give it a plug, our Badminton Talk podcast, brought to you by the Q Shuttle, by doing this on Zoom for 14 months. And we've just had to upskill, get used to it. It was really tough at the start, you know. Yes, there was the little high of having a few weeks off, and we all enjoyed it, like finishing your career in badminton. It's great for the first month maybe, but then you realise you have to kind of get your act together, and we got our act together, Mark. What do you think? Yeah?
Absolutely, John. Yeah, you could argue that. I could see that. Look, it's not easy, but we can, and you just have to reset and find something that you're passionate about, something you're interested in, and go again. And it just comes down to lifelong learning, a fascination with learning new things. I think if you've got a very curious mind and you want to learn how to build a website, how to do a podcast, how to become an accountant, maybe there's so many things, how to learn to play guitar. That might be my next project, John.
Yeah, I'll play the guitar. Yeah, I played the guitar when I was younger. I need to go back to it again at some stage. We could set up a band, Mark. We could maybe, you, me, and we need to then get a drummer and a bass and and a vocalist. What do you think, Mark? We could do that, yeah?
Yeah, I think we could. We certainly need a vocalist. If you don't want to hear me sing, John.
Well, a lot of singers today, Mark, they don't have to sing. All you can do is talk. Maybe you could do some rap. What do you think? We could do rap. We could have our own Badminton Legends group. What do you think? Sponsored by the Q Shuttle.
Yeah, I think my role might be the songwriter. I love poetry and words, so I'll try and write the songs, John. Okay, right. Okay, you could be the front man.
Okay, well, I could do the talking on your literature, and then we could get. We could look at then bringing a couple of others in. What do you think? We could get them all from the Badminton Cube. What about Philip McHugh? Would he make a good bass, do you think?
I don't know.
Seamus Halpin, a good drummer, you know. Actually, he'd be very loud. He'd be very good backing vocalist too, you know.
I think Greg Farrell might be a good one as well.
Oh, Greg Farrell would be great. Yeah, no, I could see him. Mind you, he could take over from the vocalist. So be careful with him, you know. I could see that, but we could bring Greg in too. Well, there is some wonderful new ideas for Mark Topping. The Legends Badminton Band could be our career path when maybe, Mark, we've run out of juice with the Badminton Talk podcast. And what do you think? Yeah.
Who knows, John? Who knows what the future will bring?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Mark, it's been absolutely fantastic interview with David McHugh. As we've just said, former Irish and European champion, sailed with the best, represented Ireland at 2 World Championships, has his own company now, Line Up Sports. Check him out, of course. So it is time to wrap this up for another week. Of course, Mark, we did say we would introduce our next guest. We have to hold that back in suspense on our next week's podcast. So more about this amazing person on sponsorship. So Mark, doing anything for the weekend?
Yeah, I call it forest bathing, John. I love walking in the forest. So I tried to get 10 kilometres of walking every day. I don't always achieve it, but I at least have a good target. And but I love the forest, John. So and the weather forecast is supposed to be great this weekend. So I'll probably hit a couple of forest trails.
Wonderful.
What about yourself?
Well, Mark, by the time this Badminton Talk podcast airs, you know, I will be finding myself on a badminton court, probably heading down to Mount Pleasant to pleasant things and knocking with maybe Dylan and Sophia, maybe Norman and Vinny. I think we got to be careful on who we can do. Just one household share, but yeah, I can't wait to really get back to a really nice sprung court, Mark. And get my game back intact for the Masters. That's my plan, Mark.
Brilliant, John. That just sounds like heaven to me. Yeah, just go for it. And be careful, though, maybe the first couple of weeks. I think we haven't used those muscles for 6 months, so maybe just ease your way back in, John, when you get back on the court.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm going to have to go careful with those muscles. Mind you, I've been doing a bit of running in the park and but maybe running forward. Now I need to run backwards and sideways, Mark. So, yeah, I'm excited about that. So, look, Mark, we only have about 10 seconds. Listen, you have a great weekend doing your forestry and back to nature, and see you next week.
John, take care. Thanks a million.